Well, good morning, everyone. I want to add my thanks to Ian, Jess, Dr. Wortham, Operation Recovery, the Heroes Wellness Collective, and of course, Harvard University for hosting this wonderful event. For any of you that had an opportunity to walk around Sanders and Memorial Hall, if you have a chance, take a moment and read some of the names. Harvard has kind of a lost tradition of serving in the military, and by that, a lot of people don't recognize Harvard as one of the number one, first of all, the highest number of Medal of Honor recipients in private schools. The service academies obviously have a much greater number. But they have their own rich legacy, and I just want to share one with you as a fun fact as you sit here today. We're all familiar with Paul Revere and his role in the American Revolution, but not many people know his grandson, Paul Revere, joined the Harvard Regiment. Harvard fielded an entire regiment called the 20th Massachusetts Infantry during the Civil War. And he had been wounded in Antietam and a couple other battles, but on that faithful battle at Gettysburg that turned the tide of the war and saved the Union, he was commanding the Harvard Regiment, and he was severely wounded and actually died on the 4th of July, defending the freedom that his grandfather helped secure. And so there's a legacy here at Harvard of serving as well as serving those who serve. And I would like to share the work that HomeBase does and talk about how we can look at reimagining what's possible in treating veteran care. On a personal note, speaking here at Harvard today has brought me back full circle to my own journey. Not because I was born a half mile away at Mount Auburn Hospital, but because it was just down the street from here at the intersection of JFK Street and Memorial Drive that I had an experience that nearly broke up my family and destroyed my career. After 24 months of back-to-back deployments, starting on September 11, 2001, with Homeland Security operations on September 11th, following up by Afghanistan in 2002, and then the invasion of Iraq in 2003, I came home a different person. Iraq had been particularly difficult for me, especially my time in Fallujah. I didn't fully understand why, nor could I make any sense of what was happening to me, but I knew something wasn't right. I spent the next 2 years adrift, at home, work, and in nearly every aspect of my life. My wife, Colleen, a former Army captain turned nurse, saw it when I couldn't. She urged me to get the help, but like most veterans, I always deflected her concerns. I had the trifecta of a bad transition. I had lost my sense of purpose. My new assignment was a big letdown after commanding 3 battalions and the last 2 in combat. I was disconnected from my family. Colleen would later say, "You were home, but you really weren't home." And I needed clinical assistance, but didn't realize the fact or accept that fact. But I was oblivious to all of these, and like many other veterans, I just tried to push through these challenges. This is a mindset, or one of the mindsets, that we really need to change focus on. In the Army, in the Marine Corps, I'm sure, we make a very clear distinction between hurt and injured. If you're hurt, you suck it up, and that's what duct tape and 800 milligram Motrin's for. If you're injured, we medevac you to treatment. The problem is, when it comes to mental health and brain injuries, most of us convince ourselves that we're hurt and we're not injured. And when we mistake the two, we never get the treatment we need, and over time, nothing gets better, and far too often, we lose those warriors. In the spring of 2006, I was selected to attend a National Security Fellowship here at Harvard. An incredible honor and a personal moment of pride for me as a public school UMass grad. Just a week later, we received even more exciting news. My daughter Kayla had been accepted to Harvard as an incoming freshman, and it felt like everything was kind of falling in place for us as a family. We celebrated a memorable weekend here in Cambridge, buying the obligatory Harvard sweatshirts and baseball hats, and walking around this historic campus. As we drove home at the end of the weekend with the top down, enjoying the warm air, we hit bumper-to-bumper traffic on Memorial Drive. The closer we got to the intersection of JFK Street, the more chaotic it became, and throngs of people moving in every direction. In Iraq, being stuck in traffic was one of the most dangerous situations you could face. Our thin-skinned Humvees offered little protection, and a crowded street meant vulnerability. If somebody pulled a gun or a grenade, there was nowhere you could go. As I inched towards JFK Street, my body reacted before my mind could process what was happening. And that force that had saved me in Iraq had kicked in full force. My pulse quickened, my breath shallowed, and every fiber of my body was screaming to get out of there. But I tried to keep my composure and maintain my presence in front of my family. Just as I reached the intersection, a young guy stepped off the curb in front of my car. I slammed on the brakes, leaned on the horn, and yelled at him in true Boston fashion. Out of the corner of my eye, however, I saw something fly out of his hand. I heard my wife scream, and then I lost it. Thankfully, my wife had my right arm pinned down on the stick shift lever so I couldn't get out of the car. And after spewing a demonic exchange with him, I caught myself and then drove home. Nobody spoke for the entire ride. When we did get home, Colleen didn't mince words. She looked at me and said, "For the past 2 years, I've been asking you to get help. Now you can either do that or you can move out. And I strongly recommend you go stay on the base tonight," which I did. So I did, and the next day, I reluctantly made an appointment with the mental health team. I didn't want to go. I resented the idea. But sitting in those sessions, unpacking what I'd been carrying around was really helpful for me. If I hadn't reached out, I truly believe my life would have taken a completely different trajectory. Years later, when things were going well, Colleen and I talked about that day, and she said, "I bet you still think you were right to blow up that day." And I shrugged sheepishly and said, "Yes." And I followed up by saying, regardless of any of the PTSD stuff, the guy hit you in the head with an apple. What guy wouldn't have gone after him? And then she said something that stayed with me ever since. She said, "Let's go with your fantasy version, where you jumped out of the car, came to my rescue, punched him out. What do you think happened next? What do you think Harvard would have done when you beat up a student in front of 200 people at an intersection? What do you think the Army would have done? They both would have kicked you out." And then she said, "More importantly, the kids saw something in you that day that they had never seen before, rage. You weren't going to just rough him up. If you'd gotten out of the car, you would have ended him. And where would we all be today if that had happened?" And so I think about that a lot as I meet the thousands of young men and women that come to HomeBase. Looking back on this, I consider myself to be one of the fortunate veterans. I was able to get the care I needed when I needed it. I had a loving family and a community of support, and I was eventually able to regain that sense of purpose that I needed. But what I worry about is those younger soldiers, 18, 19, 20, that did that first enlistment and had 2 combat deployments and then came home, and they didn't have that foundational family of support. They didn't have that new sense of purpose. They didn't have that connection, and they didn't have access to care when they needed it. I plan to begin my morning's remarks with a simple question. Why are we here today? What do we hope to take away from these important discussions in this powerful documentary? For me, the answer is clear. I hope we leave more committed than ever to preventing other warriors from experiencing what I did just a few blocks from here back in 2006. I want to stop veterans from getting trapped in that same darkness that took my personal security detail leader, Sergeant First Class Greg Jasinskis, who put a gun in his mouth, or Colonel Brett Conaway, who served as my operations officer in Iraq, who lost his fight back here and stepped in front of a commuter train. And I want to stop the 20 to 40 veterans who die by suicide every single day. We've all heard that the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. But for the past 24 years, that's exactly what's been happening with respect to veteran mental health and brain injury care. Nearly $5 trillion have been invested in the VA since 2000, and their annual budget has skyrocketed from $40 billion to nearly $400 billion annually. For more than a decade, the VA has implemented a strategy aimed at reducing suicide rates among veterans through clinically based interventions and public health initiatives. but we have not moved the needle in stemming the tide of these needless deaths. VA Secretary Doug Collins has described the Department of Veterans Affairs as a punching bag due to widespread criticism from veterans and lawmakers. In response, he has proposed significant reforms, including workforce reductions to improve efficiency and accountability. The VA is the largest integrated healthcare system in the country, yet it has been crippled by mismanagement, crumbling infrastructure, falsified records, and a bloated bureaucracy, all while serving a shrinking veteran population that has diminished from 26 million to 18 million over the past 20 years. And the trajectory will take us down to 12 million in about another 15, 20 years. But the greatest failure, which is a national disgrace, is that since 2000, we've lost between 140 and 200,000 veterans to suicide. I met with Secretary Collins 2 weeks ago and had a very candid talk. We discussed the sobering fact that only 1/3 of veterans rely on the VA health system for their health care. And of this already small group, 70% of them use a combination of VA care and community-driven care. The stark reality is that 2/3 of our veterans receive the majority of their care outside of the VA. Even more troubling is that more than half of the veterans that die by suicide every day are part of that group that have no connection to the VA. So as we talked about this with Secretary Collins, how can you affect that unless you engage the private sector? How will you ever change that number? And they use 17, it could be 17 to 30, according to some folks at Duke. Whatever that number is, it's just reprehensible. But how can you do that if 60% of the people aren't in your system if you don't engage people outside of your system? The VA's public health approach to suicide prevention combines clinically based intervention, community-driven strategies to address veteran suicide. The strategy also emphasizes lethal means safety by promoting firearm safety, as well as the upstream risk of financial strain, housing insecurity, and unemployment. While some of these efforts show promise, they do little to support the majority of veterans disconnected from the VA. We cannot and should not accept the status quo, especially when lives are at stake. To his credit, Secretary Collins agreed that the VA's past strategy has not worked, and he acknowledged that something new is needed. He said, in fact, if we are losing 17 veterans a day at the end of my 4 years as secretary, I want to be able to say, I tried everything I could to fix it. He ended by saying, I am open to change. And so that is very promising because that is not the reception I've received in the past. I proposed to Secretary Collins that the $500 million spent annually on VA suicide prevention awareness campaigns of commercials and ads could be far better spent investing in building a comprehensive private sector solution that expands access to innovation and evidence-based care while collaborating with the VA. The slow-moving evolutionary change attempted by the VA is not working. We need to reimagine what's possible through revolutionary change and develop solutions and connect veterans to mental health care when and where they need it. While I'm hopeful that Secretary Collins is committed to change and open to this proposal, I remain cautiously optimistic. We all know that the VA has an enormous job, and it just became more difficult with the recent cut of 80,000 people. While they work to fix themselves, we cannot wait. Those of us in the private sector, academic medicine, and the nonprofit world must press forward. So how do we tackle this challenge? A few years ago, I was in a small meeting with President Bush and a group of veteran nonprofit leaders, and he asked a great question. He said, how do we define a successful veteran transition? My answer wasn't based on theory. It came from my personal experience, hundreds of conversations with veterans, and years of work at HomeBase. Now, a decade later, my answer hasn't changed a bit. I remain convinced that there are three critical elements to a successful transition. The first, healing the wounds. Veterans must address their physical and mental health injuries. Without this foundation, everything else is at risk. The second, rebuilding community. Our veterans need to replace the brotherhood and sisterhood that they lost when they left the military. Isolation is dangerous, connection is life-saving. And third, they need to find a new mission. They must discover a new purpose in life, something that gives them a reason to get up every day and a place to belong. A meaningful work, a job, a volunteer position, anything that gets them out of the house and connected to people in a meaningful way. At HomeBase, we're well positioned to address the first of these three elements. And in a moment, I'll describe some of the work we're doing. And later today, you'll hear from six amazing colleagues that work with me and work at Mass General Hospital. It's clear that we need to significantly improve our transition program from military to civilian life. The DoD owns the Transition Assistance Program, and frankly, it's broken. It should be handed over with funding to the nonprofit sector. If the Transition Assistance Program in place today, the challenge with the Transition Assistance Program that we have in place today, it leaves our veterans totally unprepared to reconnect in civilian life and build a new community and find that next purpose. This topic is worthy of an entirely new day here, an entirely new conversation, so I'm not going to prolong that, but I will tell you that is a critical element to saving veterans, is affecting a positive transition from when they leave a base to when they come back to that local community, connecting them to care, connecting them to resources to find work, and more importantly, connecting them to a community. So what can we do on the clinical side? And that's HomeBase's, that's our vantage point, that's our sweet spot. The short answer is that we as a nation must do better by engaging the private sector with this problem, since that's where a majority of the veterans receive their care. And that is where our greatest clinical resources and research resources are available. For more than a decade, I've had the great honor to work alongside some of the smartest people in the nation to develop solutions for these invisible wounds. When I first began my work at MGH, I met with Dr. Jerry Rosenbaum, the chief of psychiatry, and he shared something that resonated deeply with me. He said, when it comes to mental health and brain injury care, we as a nation are operating at an AM radio level of medicine in a digital medical world. Here at MGH, we may have the best AM radio in the country, but it's still an AM radio. Well, I'm proud to say that over the past 12 years, our extraordinary team at HomeBase has launched a series of game-changing treatment programs that have moved us from AM to FM, and today we're on the verge of making a next leap forward. Later today, you'll hear from six of my colleagues from HomeBase and MGH as they discuss how we'll take that next step, leaving behind FM and finally entering the digital medical world. HomeBase, as you heard a moment ago, is a partnership between the Red Sox and Mass General and the Harvard medical system. And that is an interesting bipolar relationship. When I first got there, working with owners of the Red Sox and the leadership at Harvard, it was just diametrically opposed. Every night, the Red Sox had this count: how many pitches, how many hits, how many home runs, how many beers sold, how many hot dogs sold, how many seats, butts in seats. They want instant gratification for everything they do. On the other side of my board, I've got the Mass General leadership, focused on a 30-year war against cancer. At meetings when I first got there, they'd say, how many people did you guys save today? And we'd have to explain it. And over time, it took a while for the cultural knowledge to pass on, and they got it. But I would tell you this, they are the most philanthropic sports franchise. It was their idea to create this program after back-to-back World Series visits to the White House, followed by visits to Walter Reed. And after they saw the state of affairs in 2008, during the surge in Iraq and the highest number of catastrophically injured people, they will move to action. And they've invested over $30 million to support wounded and injured veteran care. So we began as a small outpatient clinic with 200 to 300 patients a year and an operating budget of around $3 million. And the Red Sox and Mass General made up most of that the first 3 years. Today, we've grown to the nation's first private sector national center of excellence. We now care for more than 40,000, we've cared for more than 40,000 veterans from all 50 states and 13 countries. All of this care is provided at no cost, and that includes flights, lodging, and meals. HomeBase has grown significantly and cares for more than 4,000 people every year through programs that range from building community connectivity to intensive clinical care. We now have three primary lines of effort. The first and always will be our regional program here in Massachusetts for New England veterans. We offer a virtual care program that successfully guarantees that every Massachusetts veteran, regardless of where they live, will have access to first-class mental health care at no cost. They also have access to all of our national programs as well, so this is a gem for folks that live here in Massachusetts. In addition, partnering with the Benson Henry Institute for Mind-Body Medicine and the Red Sox sports medicine team, we built a series of wellness-based programs, fitness, nutrition, and mind-body medicine. And then finally, we have a bunch of community-based series called Adventure Series events where we run we probably have about 1,500 people a year join us for community integrated programs, whether it's skiing up at Loon Mountain or duck boat rides around the city. It connects military members with other people with shared experiences. In some cases, that's all they need. That's our lightest touch program. We also have national intensive programs. More than a decade ago, we created a 14-day intensive clinical program that compresses 2 years of treatment into 2 weeks. And what that enabled us to do was to open the access aperture of care to any veteran living anywhere in the world. And I mean literally anywhere in the world. We routinely fly people in from across the country, from Japan, Guam, Europe. If there's a US veteran anywhere in the world and they need our care, at absolutely no cost, they are flown to Boston to participate in these 14-day programs. As we structured this program, we built pretty much like the military. The centerpiece of our ground forces are a squad, 10 to 12 people. So our cohort groups are 12 people. Every 2 weeks, we fly 2 cohort groups or 24 veterans in from anywhere in the world. And what's interesting is over time, we've developed specialty groups because, frankly, we found a need, we found a better way to do things. And today, because of a great work we've been doing with U.S. Special Operations Command, 12 of our 41 cohort groups are all special operations team members, mostly from active duty. We also do 3 cohort groups specifically for surviving military families of suicide in partnership with a national organization called TAPS, which is Tragedy Assistance Program for Survivors. They have a subset of people, parents and spouses primarily, who either witnessed a suicide or walked in on the remains. They are by far some of the most injured people we care for. They literally have nowhere else to go. There is no other clinical program especially for them in the country. More recently, we've added 3 cohort groups for all women veterans. And then after some work we did last year with U.S. Special Operations Command, we identified a need for former Special Operations team members that were women. And these include pilots from Task Force 160, the Night Stalkers, female Rangers, et cetera. They have their own unique challenges. And then in the last year, we added 2 new ones. One was Spanish-speaking cohorts, and we found that we had a number of veterans that came from Puerto Rico that obviously knew English when they were in the military, but when they returned back to the island, they returned back to speaking Spanish. And when you come to a clinical program, they could still speak English, but it got a little technical, so we have Spanish-speaking cohorts. And then we've added Native American cohorts. For those who don't know this, Native Americans constitute the highest ethnic participation in the military, bar none, and they have the worst access to care. Based on some work we were doing in Arizona, part of our capability-based program I'll talk about in a second, we identified a huge gap in care. Navajo Nation is roughly the size of New England minus Maine, and they have 3 small community hospitals to take care of everybody. And you basically would drive 3 to 4 hours to get to Winchester Hospital. The resources were not deep there. Specialty care is not deep there. 4 out of 10 homes don't have running water or electricity, so telehealth isn't a great option. So we have a big partnership now with Native Americans. Finally, the third element we focus on is capacity building. We now have partnership programs across Florida in Naples, Fort Myers, Tampa, and Pensacola, where we work with community hospital systems to build capability within their system to treat veterans and then develop funding mechanisms to ensure none of the veterans ever had to pay. So we train them, we certify them in trauma therapy, we pay the salary for the doctors for the day, and they deliver care to veterans at no cost. That is a highly scalable model that we've had great success with, and building upon that, we now have a program in Arizona at the request of Governor Ducey, where we've opened up our wellness-based program at Arizona State University, and we'll soon be launching a partnership with the Honor Health System in Phoenix. And in tandem with that, we met with leaders in Houston who had the same request. And this May, we'll be opening a partnership with Medinger Hospital, which is one of the top mental health hospitals in the nation. And we'll be building out that Texas program where 20% of all Texas veterans live in the Houston area this year. So that will continue to develop. We also have international partnerships. About a month ago, we had about 50 Israeli medical providers come to HomeBase to learn about what we do. And just this past week, Dr. Joe Bondi, who will be speaking with you later, just returned from the Ukraine yesterday with a team from HomeBase that was working with them to build a needs assessment and find out how we can assist them. And in about 2 weeks, we'll have about 15, 20 Ukrainian medical professionals spending 2 weeks with us at HomeBase. We also have partnerships with the United Kingdom, Australia, and Canada. HomeBase currently has 26 innovation and research projects underway, and you will learn more about some of these today from our team. But as we look towards the future and our transition to the digital medical world, we have shifted our focus to a health span approach and an exposure-based model of care. We will now examine a range of negative exposures like repetitive blast injury, concussive injury, mental health and moral trauma, toxic exposures, and the impact of their cognitive function, mental well-being, sleep dysfunction, pain management, and a number of chronic illnesses and injuries that result from these exposures. Based on a parallel study from Harvard on NFL concussions, it was identified that NFL players with repetitive concussive injuries have a shortened lifespan by about a decade and a shortened health span by about the same margin, and an increased rate of a number of metabolic and cardiac issues, hypertension, diabetes, and even cancer as a result of those injuries. We know through our preliminary look that the outlook for some of our folks with these same type of injuries is probably going to be worse because, as you know, football players don't get blown up, football players don't get sent to toxic environments, football players don't witness the death of friends or others in that trauma. So all of these things is probably going to paint a worse picture, so that is now our focus. This research will pave the way for us to deliver a precision medical model by leveraging machine learning and AI to connect the dots between exposures and injuries, and then build a decision support tool for our clinicians to provide them a link to the best care option for our patients. The challenges we face are simply too vast, though, for one organization to tackle on its own. And frankly, that is why the VA has struggled. For the past 20 years, they've tried to do it alone, and we're hopeful that they will look to these civilian partnerships. Many years ago, I learned that a vision without resources is just a hallucination. At HomeBase, we know that our most valuable resource is our team. And our second most valuable resource is a broad range of strategic partnerships. By collaborating with others, we can accomplish far more than any of us could do on our own. Through partnerships with the Wounded Warrior Project and academic medical centers at UCLA, Emory, and Rush, we established the Warrior Care Network that now runs these same 2-week programs across the country. We then built upon this with new partnerships with the Fisher House, the Navy SEAL Foundation, U.S. Special Operations Command, and many other organizations. And each of these partners allowed us to leverage synergies and grow beyond our individual capabilities. As you listen to today's lineup of remarkable speakers, you'll hear about groundbreaking approaches to tackling the epidemic of veteran suicide and the mental health crisis our veterans face. By harnessing the collective expertise and forging strong partnerships, we can develop innovative solutions, lasting solutions to these very, very complex problems. Together, we can reshape the future of veteran mental health care and reimagine what's possible. Reducing suicide among our veterans is our greatest challenge, and addressing it requires a multifaceted approach built around 3 key strategies. Number 1, ensuring access to mental health care when and where our veterans need it. Number 2, reducing access to lethal means such as firearms and toxic substances. 70% of all veteran suicides involve a gun. And that's going to be the tricky one. And I think that one is going to have to come from within the veteran community, peer-to-peer, just like that great campaign in the 80s that said, "Friends don't let friends drive drunk." Veterans shouldn't allow other veterans to maintain guns when they know they're not great. Safeguard them, just lock them up, voluntarily let me hold on to that for you, let me hold your ammo, let me hold the firing pin. Somehow we've got to slow the flash to bang between somebody has a suicidal ideation to when they actually literally pull the trigger. It's about a 10-minute window, and if we can disrupt that, we can save lives. And then finally, one of the most important areas, promoting social connectiveness. People don't do well when they're alone. And the more we can pull people out of the shadows and into the light and connect them with other veterans, other groups, other community members, the more lives we can save. While the VA navigates its transition, grappling with a rapidly shrinking and geographically dispersed veteran population, an unsustainable budget, and millions of square feet of fallow, unusable office space, we cannot wait. We must continue our critical work to develop new and effective solutions that provide veterans and their families with the care they need and richly deserve. This transformation is not about dismantling the VA. It's about preserving what works and then partnering for what they're missing and the private sector can add value. The status quo for veterans care was somebody else's solution to a previous problem. And this one was built in the 1990s. That veteran population, which was an aging Vietnam, Korea, World War II population, is not with us anymore. The needs are no longer the same. The healthcare system is no longer the same. As we assess the future and the current state of veteran healthcare, one thing is clear. This is not the time for evolutionary change. This is the time for revolutionary change. This is an inflection point where we can partner with the VA to transform the way we as a nation, using all of the nation, not all of government, to solve these problems. We must not adapt to the future, we must create it. Thank you all for your attention to this very, very important matter today.